Hello, GTD Connect members. It's John Forrester here again with Meg Edwards and Julie Ireland. Hi, Meg and Julie.
Hi, you guys.
Hola.
Good to see you too, and good to have everyone back with us who was with us for our first of this series of 3 webinars. And for those of you who weren't on that first one, no problem. We're going to get you current anyway. So a quick background here. The idea behind this series of 3 webinars is that Meg and Julie and I were talking about how do people really know when they're trusting their system? What are the signs when somebody's not quite trusting the system 100%? And what could we do to help you get closer to that 100% and further along your path of GTD mastery? So that was where we got the trust challenge idea for the webinars. And the more we talked about the content, the more we realized that all of the signs that someone is either really trusting the system or not quite trusting it, everything about that shows up in the steps of the weekly review. So this isn't specifically about trying to get mastery of the weekly review. It's more of how to get more trust in your system overall. And it just so happens that we're doing it through the lens of the weekly review by breaking the 3 sections of the weekly review down into 3 separate webinars. So today's is the second of those 3, and we're going to work on the Get Current steps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Meg.
Thank you, John. During the last webinar, we had left you with asking you what you could commit to over the last month to improve your practice around the Get Current steps and have greater trust in your system, which was to collect loose papers, get your ins to 0, and do a mind sweep. So
get clear.
What?
It was get clear.
Yeah. Oh, right. Get clear. Thank you. It's not like I haven't been doing this for a long time. And so in the question box, if you could just let us know, how's the last month been for all of you? What have been your wins? What have been your takeaways? How have you seen it really help you get a more trusted system? So we'd love to hear from you guys in the question box.
And I can start out by saying that it really has been super helpful for me because these little residual pockets of capturing that I just have been ignoring, and then they've been backing up on me. So my purse, my handbag is one that I've just really gotten much better on a day-to-day basis of, like, receipts and post-it notes and my GTD note-taker wallet, just kind of shoring that all up.
Super. We have Barb. Hi, Barb. Barb is saying, my inboxes are all empty. Congratulations. Nice. That's great. Uji making good progress on it. Inbox 0 every day, Laura. All right. Let's see. John, no relation to this John, is working with his new note-taker wallet. Cool.
I love that Carol is saying about her OmniFocus inbox, because sometimes in my experience with clients using OmniFocus, it can be a little bit of a dead zone. So I appreciate that you're focusing on that, Carol. It's great.
Yeah, good. And Cecilia, for me, there's been a revival of overdoing and also be able to clean up the day before my review. Okay.
That's great.
A couple of people are saying they made progress on the idea of distinguishing between the current inputs and backlog and not trying to look at the backlog as all current. That's great.
I just want to say Vishal is saying, my kids' school papers and homework have been filed and cleared. That's so great, Vishal, because I think that's one of those kind of more obscure things that you wouldn't think of as like having to capture. So or clarify. So that's terrific.
Cool.
Okay, great. So what we're that's fabulous, you guys. Congratulations. That's exactly why we're doing this today. So what we're going to focus on today is the Get Current part of the weekly review. And what that is remember last time we did the Get Clear, which was the collect loose papers and materials, get your ins to 0, and empty your head. And now we're going to focus on the Get Current part, which is really the heart of the weekly review. It's not the Get Clear part. And then the next webinar we're going to do is we're going to focus on the Get Creative part. So David has a really lovely quote here. I always love his quotes, which is, blockage in the flow of anything undermines the ability to be present, fresh, and creative in that arena. So again, it's just another wonderful way of talking about the value of the weekly review and also the ability of having a really trusted system. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with, we're going to divide this webinar today in kind of to the 6 sections of the Get Current part. And the first part of the Get Current is to review the next actions list, whatever list you may have. So in the question box, if you can start with letting us know on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are you with this step? So if Julie and John, you want to read them off?
I see a series of 3 8s. That's great. And then 3 4, 7 5, 4, depends on the day. 9, I do well at that. Good. 8 4, very effective. Sadly, only a 3.
It's a range for sure. And I think it's not nothing set in stone here, because one week I might be a 3 and the next week I might be an 8. So it's ever evolving.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of the things that we see in this step. I actually did a coaching last week, and I actually walked the client through a weekly review today for the first time. Now again, we all do some sense of a weekly review. And it was really fascinating when we got to this step, because he had been using all of his free time since the coaching on clarifying and organizing. And his lists were getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And he just said to me, I'm not working off of my list now. I've gone back to work out of my inbox, and I kind of don't know why, and it's kind of like this very fascinating dilemma that I see happens with people is, and I hear this a lot, my lists are too big.
Yeah.
And really what that is saying is you're just seeing too many options, and sometimes I'm saying, great, it's time for a weekly review to clean that up. And so what we did is, and I do find this interesting here because, again, we didn't number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so I find that a lot of people on this step also clean up their waiting for list, even though we're going to talk about it as a second step. And I think that this is really an opportunity to, again, reflect on, okay, so you didn't do those actions this week. That's okay. But are you committed to do them again? Do these actions still attract you? Do they repel you now? Are they no longer relevant? Should you really be delegating them out, or do they really belong on the someday maybe list? And what's going to make it so that you're going to be attracted to look at this list again?
Hey,
I just want to add to that.
Meg, that ties right in with one of Mark's comments, which is when he's reviewing those, he was saying he sometimes gets into the just saying, yep, 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 instead of really reflecting. Go ahead, Julie, what were you going to say?
It was part of what I was going to say, which is, you don't want this to be a rote process. This is really you want to have your focus here, because you're really, you're kind of starting from a clean slate. Are these the things I'm still committed to doing? And you also, my experience too is really making sure that those next actions are granularly defined enough. Because I often find that, even me, I feel like gosh, I've been doing this for so long, and I still catch myself. On next action, I will be sitting there for a while because it's not really a next action. So it's a great opportunity to kind of catch any subtleties and how we've defined that stuff to really make it even more clear. And another thing is due dates. I find, Meg, I'm sure you see this, where it's a good opportunity to, if something is past a due date, it's like don't just blow that off. Really ask. It's like, was that really a due date? Do I need to renegotiate it? This is a great opportunity to just really focus on these commitments that we're making and really, recommit to them, or define them a little more clearly if that shows up, or maybe it's time to move to Sunday maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's an opportunity to not have your list screaming at you. And I think that's where, particularly if people are electronic and like, for example, I when I'm coaching somebody and I see something like an Outlook and it's all red, half of them are red because they put arbitrary due dates on, and you want it to just be something that you're attracted to look at. When you've got some discretionary time, you want to be able just to look at these lists to say, hey, is this an opportunity for me to get any of these done? This is where David says you can only feel good about what you're not doing when you know what you're not doing. And I see more than not either sometimes not enough on the lists, which usually is an indicator that people are keeping things on their mind, or they are working out of their inbox, or using their papers and files as a reminder, or there are too many options. And people say, well, how many options can you see? Like, what's enough? Well, that varies for people. There's some people that only want to see 10 or 15 options on a list. There's some people that are very comfortable seeing 40 options in a list. There's also about the time frame. You know, there isn't a, like, these lists are not for things to get done this week or this month. Yeah. And I think that for me, what's always worked is when I am going to do work, these are the options I want to see, and that changes. It's really amazing for me. It changes week to week. So hopefully some of these tips are going to help you just really get a little bit more conscious about those actions lists so that they really are useful for you.
And I just want to share one thing, which is what I'm currently doing, like as a personal kind of my own edge here. It's like when I did my weekly review on the weekend, as I tend to do, and I'm really looking at like what do I really want to complete by the end of the year. I think it's a nice time of year to kind of be looking into like completions for the year, so that we have the space to be thinking of those higher horizon levels. So that's just kind of just an invitation to anyone. Just if there's like anything that really would just love to not drag into a new year, like and just get clear about that.
Great. So in the question box, can you share, given what we've just discussed, what are your opportunities for improvement?
Richard says, thanks, Meg. Great comment. Says this talks about some of my problems, and a couple other people are saying this has been helpful for them. Reestablish the weekly review. Good.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you.
Hey, we got lots of people coming up with opportunities for improvement. Good.
Okay, thank you. So now the next part of the Get Current part is to review previous calendar data. And I loved it because, again, I'm probably going to be talking about this client this morning that I just worked with because it's so fresh, where he was just like, really, Meg? Like, really, I need to do this step? And I'm like, trust me, it's really a valuable step. And people are like, what do you mean by this? And really, it's about going back into the calendar. If you do the weekly review on a regular basis, you're just going back maybe 1 or 2 weeks. And you're just seeing if by looking at your previous calendar data, does it trigger anything? And actually, this client had put a to-do on a calendar day, and it didn't get done. And that enough was him to say, wow, I'm glad I caught that, because that was really important. Maybe a meeting had been canceled and hadn't been rescheduled. And maybe when you look back on something, it triggers like, oh, yeah, that reminds me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how effective do you feel like you are with this step?
Yeah, I feel like this is, for me, I love this step because I always catch something. There's always some little thing that slipped through the cracks, and I'm like, wow, thank you, weekly review. And sometimes clients will say, I don't need to do that. I don't really have a reason. And then when we do it together, they're like, oh, that's right. Yep. Oh, wow. So
we have Father Campo. Good morning. Good to hear from you again. We've been talking on email about podcasts. Father Campo is saying, this is one of my favorite steps. He's a 10 on it. Congratulations. We got 9, 8, lots of high scores here. Carol's saying this is one of her favorites too. This is a popular step, apparently.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, people are saying they like this step and they're effective at it. Let's see, Mark mentions struggling with managing 2 calendars, work and personal.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I think that in the weekly review, these 2 steps, review your previous calendar data and review your upcoming calendar data, is so powerful, particularly when people have multiple calendars. They're personal, they're professional. Sometimes there's a family calendar that they need to have. I mean, I've seen people have up to 3 or 4 calendars, and that weekly review is so critical to make sure that everything's in sync. We actually, at the David Allen Company, have a group calendar in Lotus Notes, and in my weekly review, I make sure that my personal calendar and the professional calendar is also syncing with that calendar, and I always sometimes catch things.
Yeah.
It's really good to know.
At least I'm a week out, right? At least we're a week out if something falls through the cracks versus then not. That's the thing that I love about the weekly review is I'm always kind of a week out if something's gotten dropped, not like a month or 2 months or weeks.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like sometimes I find that like some clients have kind of these like hidden calendars that they're not quite. It's like, well, I also have a paper calendar that I've tucked in my purse. It's like we want to be aware of where those are, and whatever calendars we have to be willing to review. weekly.
We have one person, I just want to say, it's not everybody at 9s, 8s, and 7s. We've got one person saying he's a rubbish 0. I really like the adding rubbish next to the 0. It kind of emphasizes that one. And his comment there is he's good at looking forward, but doesn't have the habit of looking back yet. So hang in there, John. You're going to get that.
Okay, so given what we've just shared, what do you feel like your opportunities for improvement are?
Here we go. We've got some coming in now. Doing it more for myself and not just my team. Good one, Cecilia. More consistent about looking back, but pretty good on this one generally. View multiple calendars. Share this habit with my team. Add it to the weekly review and go from rubbish to great. There we go. I like that again.
I just want to make a comment too that just occurred to me. If any of you are if you are in like an executive and assistant relationship, I find that that's a great looking back in the calendar and moving forward can be a great opportunity to do that together, so that everyone's on the same page. I just find that can be really helpful too.
Yeah, and even in partnerships and relationships and family, I have a lot of clients that once they get the value of a weekly review, then they start bringing it in with family members. And, again, it's like, who needs to be in front of me, to review the calendar. Again, a lot of times that's usually more moving forward than moving back, but, it's just a wonderful opportunity to say, what do I need to do to get control over this?
Yeah, most of you have heard me talk about how Kelly and I regularly do a calendar review so that I pick her up at the airport at the right times and things like that. I've also heard friends of ours who have kids in school say this is just critical for making sure that the kids get picked up and dropped off at the right places at the right time. Save you lots of counseling bills when they grow up and look back and say, I was never left behind after soccer practice or any of that sort of thing. So calendar review is key for me.
Which leads us then to the get current part, which is the next step is to review the upcoming calendar. So Julie, do you want to kind of riff on this one to start with?
Yeah, this for me, I feel like it's one of my favorite steps as part of the weekly review. I love looking ahead, to get really familiar with what's coming up. Like, I want to know what's coming up. Like, that makes me feel like my workflow's a little more under control. And also, it always triggers stuff that I need to do now. Like, I did my weekly review in the weekend, and my nephew's birthday is on December 13th. I'm like, oh my God, right, because I'm going to see him next week for Thanksgiving, which means I need to do like the birthday planning, like right now. And I'm so grateful that I saw that. So when I'm looking ahead, it's almost always triggering stuff I can do now. And for me, I tend to go about 6 weeks out. Now we're in November. I'm kind of looking ahead through the first week in January. We have our staff meeting in January, and I'm just that's how far out I'm going. You don't have to go that far out, but that for me, in terms of my travel, that really helps me. But once again, it's getting familiar with what's going to show up, and then triggering stuff. A meeting showing up that you might need to prep for, or a double booked meeting that needs to be renegotiated, all this great stuff. And also sometimes what I'll do, if I need, I don't know that I necessarily do this, but I'll recommend for clients sometimes, if they're looking ahead at their calendar and they start to see that it's getting really full, they might need to kind of block some time for, the threefold nature of work for defining and doing. So that also can be part of the review upcoming calendar.
Good tips. And Chris, does that sort of answer your question about how far ahead to look? The answer is kind of depends on what your situation is, but far enough that you feel comfortable that you're planning ahead enough.
Yeah, I do think that it really varies. I actually go out till June now in my weekly review.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because it's really interesting is that, I have a kid who's graduating from high school, so I'm getting blasted with emails for June. And I just got an email from Annie's grandmother about March and pulling Annie out of school for a couple of days. And it's a lot better the point is that it really varies. But, I remember David Allen was sharing that he goes out into his calendar until he doesn't see anything more. So he used to even go out much more long range, and I think it really varies. It's really about again, what do you need to do to get calendar off of your mind? And now things are even showing up for the summer, because, we get a certain amount of vacation time. And so I need to plan. I just booked a concert in June for my daughter for her 17th birthday in June. And I needed to make sure that that was in the calendar. So, my world is really almost going till mid-September and is going to be that way.
Yeah.
And I also think that, that's personally. I think professionally, the threefold nature of work comes in here big time. And I think that this is where I can't emphasize this enough, that a lot of people think that they can't do the weekly review until they get their systems more set up with GTD, and it's actually the other way around. And I say this all the time. When you do your weekly review on a regular basis and you get to this step, this is going to have the threefold nature of work in your face, particularly for those of you who are back-to-back meetings, because, and you're going to have to probably visit the higher horizons of focus, which is, how am I going to get my defining time in? How am I going to get my doing time in? Particularly if you're coming into your weekly review with the second step of get clear, which is getting your ins to zero. This is going to get you out of it. So that by having that space, and we talked about last time about having that 1 to 1.5 hours a day free in your calendar just to clarify and organize your emails, and then you need the doing time in your calendar, and you also need the unplanned in your calendar. For a lot of my clients, they're doing back-to-back meetings, and they're realizing, wow, I need 4 or 5 hours a day open for the threefold nature of work. And once they get control over that, the get clear part gets better when they come into the weekly review. Do you see how this is like so interconnected? Yeah. And so I say to some of my clients, give this time, give it a couple of weeks or a couple of months, depending if you're back-to-back meetings, and you can get on the other side of it by really using your weekly review to help you and support you with that threefold nature of work.
And I want to just piggyback on Meg, because it's so brilliant what you're sharing. It's just reminding me of a client that I have, just terrific coaching client, and he just decided, he's a very busy executive, and he decided that he wants to go back to school and get his MBA. So he's enrolled now. It's the fall. He just enrolled, and we realize how this step for him is so critical because he just basically added like a huge area of focus to his world. And he also has many other areas of focus. He's got a partner and a home and, this very, very busy work world that he travels a lot. So we really had to look at how he can, do the weekly review, upcoming calendar, and really put that schoolwork into his calendar, because otherwise, he's going to have that sense of overwhelm and trying to balance it unconsciously. So it was really, really powerful.
That's a good one. I wanted to point out one thing I saw in the chat box, which Carol's saying when she doesn't look out far enough ahead, she stays in the busy trap. And that made me think of a visual analogy for this, which is something I learned in driving school years ago, and heaven knows why I'm thinking of this now, but the analogy was about using your high beam or low beam headlights. And the driving instructor said if you're using your low beams and driving above a certain speed, he used the phrase, you're overdriving your headlights, meaning as a driver, you're going faster than the headlights are going to show you what's coming up. So there won't be time to react to things. That's why you use your high beam headlights to look further out ahead so you have time to respond appropriately. And that's my visual analogy that came to me looking at what's coming up in the questions box and hearing you, Megan, and Julie talk about it.
No, that's fabulous. And the other thing that I find with this step, and really sometimes all of these steps, is if I'm blocking an hour to an hour and a half to do a weekly review, sometimes I'll look at a step and say, wow, I need 45 minutes on this step, or I need an hour on this step. And I won't do it during the weekly review. I'll actually schedule it in. And I'm actually just coming up, that actually happened to me last week, because for me, November and December are very, very busy. They're almost kind of like my busiest months, personally and professionally. And I used to get stressed during my weekly review because I would try to shove all that planning in. The holidays, it's my daughter's birthday, it's, travel, and, there's just a lot of birthdays and celebrations for me in November and December, and I was trying to cram that all into the weekly review, and it wasn't working. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm just going to schedule in time to work on this step. And then I moved on to the next step in the weekly review. Just like in the last webinar, we said if you can't get your Insta0 in about 15 minutes, schedule time in your calendar and move on so that you're not almost kind of perseverating on one step of the weekly review and then not getting to the other ones. Mm-hmm. So something to kind of think about if that shows up for people too in their calendar.
That's a great tip too, to make sure that you don't think that if you schedule an hour and a half or however much time for the weekly review that you have to make it all fit in that time and sort of like sacrifice doing something well because of the arbitrary time length on it. A couple of people are writing, Meg, thanks for that tip. Good one.
So fabulous. On a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are you with this step?
Let's see, we've got John at 10, good. Jody at 10, Rosendo at 8, 9.5, 10, 8, pretty good here. Mostly doing pretty well. Oh, we've got a split here, 3 when I'm busy, 10 when I'm not. Bet we can all relate to things like that. 8 to 9, 2, ... Okay.
That's high. That's really great. So can you share then what are your opportunities for improvement? It sounds like, most of you are pretty high to begin with, but maybe there's some things that we had shared that you feel like, wow, that's something to be aware of when you're doing this step.
Okay, making sure I'm looking far enough ahead and doing it more regularly. Looking farther ahead, that's coming up for several people. Scheduling the things I need more time for. Good, good. Including my spouse in my calendar. Sometimes I forget to tell him of upcoming stuff. I'm just laughing because I've been there, done that. Okay, I think I'd benefit by going out further. That seems to be a theme here, is going out further ahead. Scheduling slack time, good. Taking the time I allocated for myself and not letting work get in the way. Okay, lots of people are having opportunities for improvement on this one. That's good.
That's great. Wonderful, you guys. So then the next step of the Get Current is to review the waiting for list. And as I shared earlier, some people actually do this when they're cleaning up their actions lists. There's no rights or wrongs to it. A couple of things that I find here, things to think about. I kind of divide this step into 2 groups of people that we work with. One are people that don't have many waiting fors, and there are others who have lots of waiting fors. I actually fall in the latter group. It's probably one of my largest lists. I have actually lots of waiting for lists. I have waiting for clients to schedule. I have waiting for inquiries for seminars, inquiries for coaching. I have internal waiting fors just for DAC coworkers because they require a different response time, meaning there's some that I'm in all the time. I need to be looking at those waiting for lists daily, and there's others that I can look at weekly. I think a misinterpretation is people think that they don't look at their waiting for list until the weekly review, and that's not the case. I think that part of my job is scheduling clients, getting back to folks, and so my waiting for list, I'm in that, sometimes several times a day, those different lists, doing work from there. So I hear from a lot of people that they think that, I didn't realize that maybe I needed to look at my waiting for list, more than just in my weekly review. The next thing I come across is, so then the next thing is, when I'm reviewing the waiting for list, do I take the 2-minute rule and email people back or call people back? And that depends. If you do 5 2-minute waiting fors, that's 10 minutes, out of your weekly review, and you got to be really careful that you're not starting to do work. So just what I do, for example, is when I'm reviewing the waiting for list, I'm really going down and scanning, is there anything that's going to possibly blow up? Is there anything that, really needs my attention? And I might handle it in the weekly review, or I might make it a next action. But it's just to make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks. But I don't personally start pinging people back because I have too much volume. If you've got somebody that, you've got 5 or 10 waiting fors and there's a couple of things that you want to get back to people about and it doesn't interfere with you getting through the whole weekly review, then that's fine. You're really going to have to just play around with this step here.
Usually what I do is if it really is like the waiting for is quote unquote expired and that I really need to follow up with somebody, my rule is if I can do it in 15 seconds, if I can write back really quick and say, hey, just checking back in, and then I'll go back to my waiting for and just update the date, just followed up on, November 18th. If I can do it that quickly, I'm fine. But yeah, you don't want to get lost on these kind of chasing rabbit trails as part of your weekly review. And I want to comment on Rosendo's question because that's a great question. Is that okay, John?
That's exactly what I was going to ask you to do.
Okay. Yeah, so I love this question because it comes up all the time. How do you deal with apparent overlapping between waiting for and agendas? And Meg, do you want to answer that?
Well, sure. I am somebody, and it'd be interesting to see if you coach the same way, Julie. I actually keep agendas for only new things you want to talk to somebody about.
Yeah.
And waiting for are those things that you've delegated to somebody that you are waiting to hear back on, so that if you are having a one-on-one meeting with somebody, you're looking in two places. I find that when you blend them, when you keep your waiting fors in your agendas, now your waiting fors are scattered all over the place. And I find that at the end of the day, it doesn't really work for most people to have your waiting fors scattered here, 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 and here. I find that actually they think that it's making it easier versus just having all of their waiting fors in one place, because you want to be able to scan all those waiting fors because you're paying attention to those start dates. When did that waiting for start? And do I now need to get back to them? Or where's that due date where there's a hard due date that you need to get back to somebody? If that's embedded in your agendas, I just find that that's a lot of work. Now, for people who are electronic, if you really keep it clean, so let's say you have an agenda with Sam and you have waiting fors with Sam, if you just go to the search feature and type in Sam, you'll get filtered your agendas and your waiting fors. And there's a different level of thinking in terms of new things I want to talk to somebody about versus things that are pending.
That's great.
What about you, Julie? Do you do that as well? Or?
Very similar. I just think of agendas or like these are new discussion points for people that I have in my world that I'm interacting with all the time, and waiting for is like something specific that I've asked for that I'm waiting to receive back. And I also want to emphasize Carol's point, which is something that I do pretty ruthlessly that helps, is I date stamp all my waiting fors. Because when I'm doing my weekly review, I can just see how long it's been, and that I don't have to try to use my brain to think about how long it's been or remember or go digging in my calendar or my sent box. So, I just recommend that to everyone. Put a date. When you ask somebody for something, put a date on that so you don't, that's off of your mind. You don't have to try to remember.
Your software may do that for you automatically, and if it doesn't, it's worth taking the extra 2-3 seconds to put the date you started waiting for it. Over time, you'll figure out, so-and-so, I always need to remind so-and-so about stuff, and you'll begin to train the people you work with that your standard is you track waiting fors. And then you'll find that there are some people that you don't need to train that way, but people will begin to work to your standard.
If there's some people in my world that I don't need to bother tracking because, like Wendy, a beloved Wendy in our company, man, like if I ask her for something in about 15 minutes, she's going to get back to me. So I just don't bother. It really is, if I'm not sure, if there's even the ounce of like, I'm not sure, I will absolutely track it. It's like that 100% or nothing rule.
Yeah, that I get that a lot about, geez, it feels like I'm over-tracking, and I'm actually really lazy. I do track it. I'm so lazy, I don't want to decide, do I want to track this or not track it? I track it. I learned this methodology over a decade ago, and and I kid you not, there was one time I didn't track it, and it really had some serious repercussions to it, and it took me a long time to figure out what had happened. And I went back into my sent emails, and I'm like, wow, I didn't take that and put it in my waiting for list. And I think by that time I so trust it that it was out of sight, out of mind, and so there was a part of my job that I wasn't tracking, and it came back and bit me. And for me, that just really showed the power of that waiting for list, because I think a lot of people think, there's all these things out here, particularly people who get a little nervous delegating because they're thinking, well, I don't know how to track it. That's the beauty of this waiting for list. And so they're really the best practice, as everybody was saying, is you want to have that date. I had somebody in the company email me about a client, and I said, I pinged that person on July 5th, on August 15th, on October 5th. It was so easy to email my colleague back because I had those stamp dates, as Julie was saying, of those 3 dates. I didn't have to go into my sent. I didn't have to go figure it out and spend an hour recreating it. So, I will just add the date and keep tracking it. And so much of getting things done is about managing agreements. And if somebody says to me, I'll get back to you by next Friday, I'm tracking it.
Yep.
Now, another thing before we go on is, when do you track it on your list and when do you track it on your calendar? Do you guys get that question? Do you get that at all, Julie, in your coaching?
I don't think so.
I've heard that.
I mean, I have
how much they use their calendar for more date-specific things than I have. Mostly I hear people using a waiting for list. A few people will put it on the calendar if the waiting for is due on that specific date, not just by that specific date, but on that specific date that something particular is supposed to happen.
It's like, what do you need to get it off your mind? So, if there's something really, really important and you need that back from someone, by Tuesday, making a note in your calendar, which is for most of us the first thing we look at, and kind of go, why not? Mm-hmm. Even though it might be on your waiting for with a due date. So.
And one other thing I wanted to say is for me, this isn't all about following up with people, and the only variable in this is whether the person gets back to me or not. I also do it just as a kind of a backstop in case something like technology has a failure. So let's say I send an email out to someone and I think, well, I've delegated this and now it's a waiting for me. And
that's a good point.
If I don't put it on my list, let's say I'm sending it to Wendy, and Wendy has a reputation of tracking her waiting for so carefully here that we all know she's the best. If I send it to her, I'm assuming my email system is delivering it to her and she gets it and puts it on her list and all that. So I could get a little bit complacent and say, I don't need to put that on my waiting for list. But last week I had trouble with email getting delivered to several people. We had some new antivirus, anti-spam software installed, and it decided somehow that things I was sending out, about half of the stuff I sent out, it marked as spam and would bounce back and not deliver. So when I put something out and I'm waiting for it, I like to not just assume that technology is foolproof, because there's always a better built fool that will fool me on that. So I track a lot of stuff as waiting for.
Fabulous. Fabulous. So on a scale of 1 to 10, folks, how effective are you with this step?
10. This is my favorite, says Barb. We've got 7, 8,
11.
9. 11. Carol's just over the top on this. 9.
I love Rosendo. I'm going to be a 10. Intention.
Exactly. Yep. Francesca says 6. You'll get that up to a 9 or a 10 soon, I know. 2 or 3. I have mixed agenda waiting for things. Well, I hope this has been useful in figuring out how to kind of make those more discreet.
And Carla says, I track it, but I don't review it enough. So, Carla, that's my invitation. Like, you might be one of those people, like that Meg was saying, that needs to look at this more often than weekly. If your world is moving fast and you're delegating a ton of stuff, you're going to have to look at your waiting for list more often than weekly.
Mm-hmm. And Tom at 5 often forget to do this.
Great. So what are your opportunities for improvement, given what we shared?
Apparently mine now is tracking Wendy.
Review it more often. Need to update waiting fors whose status has changed, but I'm still waiting for. Good. Looking at it regularly, more consistency, more frequency. I'm seeing frequency, consistency more regularly. Yep, that'll take it from wherever you were on the scale up to 8, 9, 10 in a hurry.
Yay. Yay. Great, you guys. So what I want to do before I talk about this step is, where are we now in the weekly review? Up until this point, you're really working the ground level. When we talk about the horizons of focus, we have the ground level, the project level, areas of focus level, goals, vision, and purpose. So really what we've done right now is the ground level. When you think about collecting your loose papers, getting your Insta Zero, doing your mind sweep, cleaning up your actions lists, your calendar, previous calendar, upcoming calendar, and your waiting for list. That's all the ground level. And now what we're doing is we're bumping up to the project level. So we're bumping up a level. And the thing here is that the beauty of this step is that you're reviewing your project and larger outcome lists. And what you're also doing here is ensuring that there's a next action for each project. So Julie, do you want to kind of talk about what you see with clients and also with yourself when you get to reviewing your project list? Because what we want to do, folks, is we want to get everybody to this step, because from the last sharing, a lot of people, they never even get to this step because they're still getting their emails to zero.
I think
Sorry, Julie.
I want to emphasize that this is such a critical piece of the weekly review. It's like, this is like the coup de grace here, around, wow, like really making sure all of my projects, so the outcome is defined clearly. Because sometimes, one of the things I'm really seeing, the subtleties of defining clear outcomes it's so critical, because I catch myself all the time. It's like the outcome just it's like a little abstract or something like that, and then I kind of want to skip it over when I'm doing my weekly review. So now I'm just really making sure those outcomes are very crystal clear. I'm making sure there's a next action for each, and I want to just emphasize that to keep the weekly review kind of in this container, you want to keep this part pretty tactical. So even though on the checklist it says to browse through project plans, I'm a little leery of that, because I've really seen clients kind of get off into these like rabbit trails of planning, and then like 3 hours has gone by. So you really want to rein it in. It's like, if you need to do additional planning, that needs to really live outside of this.
Yeah, and so let me just share some of the things that I see, and I think Julie can also riff on this, and same with John, about, so what do we see here? One is that you do want to ask yourself, check off any projects that have been completed this week. That happens. It's like, congratulations. Sometimes projects are no longer relevant, and they need to either be, we're not going to do that now, or they need to be put on your someday maybe list, or maybe even there might be a group of you that has something called a project on hold list, which we've talked about before on these webinars. But there's a group of people who we find that you have your project list and you have your someday maybe list. David doesn't have any qualms of taking a project and putting on his someday maybe list. Even though he may decide to do that or not decide to do that at some point, we also find that it's a group of people who like to have what we call a projects on hold list, which is, I'm going to do it, but not now.
I see Julie waving, and I raised my hand on that one.
Oh, yeah?
Absolutely. Julie, do you have the projects on hold list?
I do, and it really is interesting, because sometimes it can be a bit of a cyclical thing. Like this time of year, like for Meg was saying, like we're busy. Like this is like, I feel like our busiest time of year at the David Allen Company. For me personally and professionally. So I'm looking at those lists. It's like, if there really is something that I know I'm not going to get to a next action on anytime soon, I put it on projects on hold. And I'm going to get to it. It's like very clear, but not within any, not anytime soon. So it's a bit of a safety net for me.
So that's something that if go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, same here. I move things in and out of that projects on hold list pretty regularly, depending on, in a way, it's sort of an emotional or psychic pressure releasing method. If I start to see too many projects and know, well, there's several of those that I'm not really going to take an action on, or don't need to take an action on in the next month or two, but it's still a commitment I want to achieve within the next year, I might put it on projects on hold for a couple of months, because I know that my calendar is filled in the next 2 months with stuff and customer service things and helping connect members with all kinds of things. That's not going to back off. So I just put some of those larger commitments on hold because they don't need to be done, and I'm not going to prioritize them ahead of calendar and customer service anyway. So it really helps me to have fewer apparent choices.
Well, that's great, because one of the things that I also want to add here is that it's not enough just to have a project and the next action. You kind of have to also ask yourself, do you have the bandwidth and resources to do the next action? Mm-hmm. And I see people don't ask themselves that. They just say, yeah, I got a project and a next action, and then they're really overwhelmed because they have all these projects yes, and then they'll say, yes, I have a next action for each one of them. And then I'll ask that question. It's like, well, no, I don't have the time to do that. I'm like, well, then either it's a someday maybe or a project or hold, or maybe you could delegate it. So this is the opportunity, again, to, David talks about how we're hugging the trees all week, and this is the opportunity to kind of sit back and look at the forest. This is taking the higher perspective up here, and getting off at that ground level and getting to the project level. And there's also maybe a group of you who also could use another list, which is called projects delegated. Yeah. Usually this is for any kind of Connect members who might have direct reports that they are monitoring projects. So they may be ultimately responsible for that project, but they've delegated that project to a direct report. And it's really important to separate out a project which only you can do in your areas of responsibility and focus with next actions versus projects that you're monitoring. It's not about being a micromanager, because your direct reports are going to have their own project list, but it's what are those projects that you want to monitor. So in the weekly review, you're also reviewing those projects delegated that don't necessarily have next actions, because usually your next action is just to check in with your direct report person about that. Now, sometimes I have folks that have a partner that they delegate a lot of projects out to, and they want to track that, and they want to have that on a projects delegated. So then when they're meeting with that person, they have agendas, which are new things I want to talk to you about. Waiting fors are ground level waiting fors, one-offs. And then your projects delegated is a waiting for project level. For some of you, you might be like, wow, that really made sense. And for other views, you're like, what did Meg just say? And David sometimes says, if that didn't make sense to you, then you don't need that, and please ignore it. It's just really for those people who have those kinds of jobs or lives that they also could really benefit from having a projects delegated list. I'll see clients that have a personal project list, a professional project list, a projects delegated list. Some people will combine personal and professional projects lists, and they'll have projects personal professionals and a projects delegated. Again, you need to have as many projects lists as you need to, but not too many.
I just want to answer Cecilia's question really quickly, because it's just a really tactical question. She's saying, can you describe how you do put a project on hold in OmniFocus? Cecilia, that's one of the nice features about OmniFocus. It really, I think it's the status and the status bar. You can just move it to active, right, to on hold, which is really, and then it won't show up in your active list. So it's just a simple feature of OmniFocus. And I just want to say, I love what you're sharing, Megan. It's like sometimes it's like, particularly this time of year when we might be reviewing our areas of focus, kind of completing the year, getting ready for a new year. It's like, what are things that I really need to have on my list that aren't, and what are things that have been on my list that it's like time to move it to someday, move it to on hold, move it to, as Frank Stopper says, no way, baby, instead of someday, maybe.
Okay, I've got a question for you. Any tips for moving efficiently through projects that don't have a next action? During the week, as I'm checking things off, I try to add new next actions, but weekly review is my backstop. Good, that's what it's for, partly. But then when I get to this step, I sometimes find my mental energy waning to think through the next steps. Tips for having more mental energy to come up with the next actions when you come across a project that doesn't have a next action.
I'm kind of curious about when you don't have the mental energy to come up with the next action, or are you already kind of toast by this stage of the weekly review? So it's also about, when you're doing a next action during the week, when you're doing a next action on a project, you may be doing the next step and the next step and the next step and the next step and the next step that never gets written down, nor should it. Just like when you're reading a book, you open up the book, you're on page 50, you read page 51, 52, 53, or you skip. And then you bookmark it, close the book, and then go on to whatever you're going to do. So the practice here during the week is when you do an action to keep bookmarking it, because that's moving you forward on the weekly review. And as you said, if you lose the thread or you're moving too fast in the weekly review, you'll catch it. And then really, I always find that people will come up with the next action if they just need to think about it. Or if you are really losing a lot of threads during the week, do a project review outside of the weekly review. Take the weekly review all the way up to this step, so get your ground level cleaned up, and then maybe just do a project review just on its own. If you're really tired, schedule a half hour or 45 minutes in your calendar just to do a project review?
I do that all the time, Meg. I do. It's so kind of like this, pensive for me that sometimes by the time I hit the project review, I'm just kind of starting to glaze over. So I'll have to schedule it for like the next day or something, and that really helps me because otherwise I'm just too tired to really give it my due diligence.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are you with this step? I'm just aware we have about 5 minutes left, so we've got one more step to cover. So how given what we've just shared, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective do you feel like you are here?
Just kind of a lot of like mid-range, 5,
Yep.
6s, and 7s.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not surprised by that but when we do our next webinar, those suckers are going to go up, I'm sure, because we're giving you all these tips because this really is the weekly review here. And again, I think that, so much of what's getting in people's way is the get clear part. So we really want you to get into the get current part for your weekly review. So what do you feel like your opportunities for improvement are on reviewing your project list, given what we've shared?
A couple of people are saying just getting to this step do it separately, just getting to this step, scheduling a separate project review when I need to.
I'm going to stop skipping it weekly. Yeah, that's one of those things. This is where, if we're not doing it weekly, it takes longer and there's a lot more, energy required for sure.
Yeah, a couple of people are saying need to chunk the weekly review out into separate time blocks just to make sure that they don't get into that kind of decision fatigue, mental tiredness by the end of, say, an hour and a half.
Right. So the last step is to, thank you for that, that's great. The last step is to review any relevant checklists. I'm going to spend a minute on this and then we're going to close up here because this is just something you either have or you don't. I'm going to New York on Sunday. I pulled out my travel checklist. I reviewed it. There were a couple of things I needed. I added it to my errands list. I'm going to knock them off on Saturday. When my daughter was younger and she had a birthday, I would pull out the birthday checklist, or Julie and I are going into a coaching training. We might pull out any checklist that we have to knock off to grab any next actions we have. So it's just something to use in your weekly review if you need it. If you don't have checklists, don't worry about this step. If you have checklists or you want to create checklists, this is an opportunity for you to create those.
Mm-hmm.
And how I frame it in coaching, it's like, is there anything that would be helpful for you personally to have your eyes on weekly that's not like obviously listed in the checklist? And it's like just a great opportunity to just make it part of your weekly review. So it really is like, it's like a case-by-case, person-by-person need.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are you with this step? Because sometimes I find in the beginning people are like, I've always wanted to create that travel checklist, or I've always needed to create that weekly checklist, or whatever that may be for work. And then once they get those checklists on cruise control, they just use them appropriately.
So my coaching class have heard me say this. I can hear Father Campo probably laughing, but I have a list of friends that I check with. It's like just a flat list of my really close friends, and every week I just look at that list and I just pick one person to send an email to or to schedule a phone call. It's my way of like energizing that friends area of focus, and it just works beautifully for me. So that's just one example.
We've got a couple of people saying 1 or 2 or 3. Then we have a 10 with an exclamation. Checklist queen, use it occasionally 6, kind of a range here. So one thing that occurs to me is feel free to think of more imaginative ways to use checklists. You might just be thinking of them for things like car maintenance, but there are other things like what Julie was mentioning that may be helpful for you to put into checklists.
So any opportunities for improvement?
Did you read this, Cecilia? I can survive without this, and my family is always thanking me for it. That's great.
That's good. Yep.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to move to just wrapping it up here about your turn, which is, given what we've just shared today, what can you commit to over the next month to improve your practice around the Get Current steps and have greater trust in your system? And then we'll check in next month on the next webinar of how you've done with the Get Current step.
More projects on hold. Yep, that seemed to be a takeaway for more people. A couple of people are mentioning following up on the waiting fors more consistently. chunking out the different sections of the weekly review, either individual steps or the different thirds of it: get clear, get current, get creative, get back to weekly reviews. Yep. Yep, folks are having all kinds of things that they're coming up with as things that they can commit to over the next month to make this part of the weekly review more effective for them.
Well, great. So what's your biggest takeaway from today? I think that kind of probably goes with what you people were just sharing. Anything else anybody want to add?
The project delegated list was a big takeaway.
Yay, great.
The work on the waiting fors versus agenda. Someone's biggest takeaway was how fun it is to be on these webinars with us. I can really say I agree. We have a really good time doing these. Untangle waiting for an agenda. Don't do during my weekly review. Items which hog time in my weekly review should get time scheduled elsewhere. Very smart.
Well, once again, you Connect members, I love your participation.
We tried to catch as many of your questions as we could in the questions box, and I just wanted to say, I put this in the chat box. If we didn't get to your question, or you thought of something after the answer and have another question pop up, please feel free to post in the forum about it. We've got a lively forum discussion around these webinars, and not only will you get the three of us responding to your questions, but other members who are experts on things will give you their points of view. So please feel free to post there or send an email to connect@davidco.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.